Among the many profound contributions to Buddhist philosophy, none have been as influential and far-reaching as the doctrine of emptiness articulated by the Indian philosopher Nāgārjuna. Often regarded as the founder of the Madhyamaka school within Mahayana Buddhism, Nāgārjuna did not merely restate early Buddhist ideas, but radically deepened them, pushing the boundaries of metaphysical inquiry, logic, and spiritual practice. At the heart of his philosophy lies the concept of shunyata, or emptiness, a term that, though frequently misunderstood, encapsulates a refined and rigorous view of reality. Far from promoting nihilism, as some critics have charged, Nāgārjuna's teaching on emptiness reveals the interdependent, conditioned, and ultimately insubstantial nature of all phenomena. In doing so, it provides both a philosophical and practical foundation for liberation from suffering. To understand Nāgārjuna's vision of emptiness, it is crucial to begin with the core insights of early Buddhism, particularly the notions of impermanence, anicca, non-self, anatta, and dependent origination, paticca samuppada. The Buddha taught that all things arise in dependence upon causes and conditions, that nothing exists independently or permanently, and that suffering arises from clinging to what is inherently unstable. Nāgārjuna embraced these ideas but took them to their ultimate logical conclusion. He argued that because all things are dependently originated, they must therefore lack intrinsic essence or self-nature, svabhava. In other words, to be dependent is to be empty, empty of any fixed, independent identity. This identification of emptiness with dependent origination would become the cornerstone of his philosophy and the hallmark of the Madhyamaka school. Nāgārjuna's famous declaration that whatever is dependently arisen, we declare that to be empty, serves as a succinct summary of his view. This statement, far from being a denial of the world, reveals a new way of seeing it. Emptiness, in Nāgārjuna's usage, is not a kind of metaphysical void or nothingness. It is not the negation of existence, but the negation of inherent, independent, fixed existence. A cup exists, for example, but only in relation to its parts, its use, the mind that perceives it, and the language that defines it. It does not exist from its own side or by its own power. This view does not eliminate the cup. It dissolves our mistaken grasp of it as something that exists independently of all other factors. One of the revolutionary aspects of Nāgārjuna's thought is that he applies this logic not just to physical objects, but to all conceptual and experiential categories, including causation, the self, time, motion, and even the Buddha's own teachings. For Nāgārjuna, to claim that something has an inherent essence is to fall into one of two extremes, eternalism or nihilism. Eternalism is the belief that things possess some unchanging core, while nihilism is the belief that nothing exists at all. Nāgārjuna rejects both views. Instead, he offers a middle way that recognizes the conventional existence of phenomena without mistaking it for ultimate existence. In his philosophy, the world of appearances is not denied, but reinterpreted. Things appear and function conventionally, but they do so without any ultimate, independent essence. This understanding has profound implications for spiritual practice. The root of suffering, according to Buddhist teaching, lies in clinging to self, to others, to objects, to views. This clinging arises because we mistakenly believe that things are real in and of themselves. By seeing that all things are empty, the practitioner can begin to loosen the grip of attachment. Nāgārjuna's philosophy thus serves not merely as an intellectual exercise, but a tool for liberation. His teachings are a form of upaya, or skillful means, designed to help beings break free from the conceptual entanglements that bind them to samsara. Yet Nāgārjuna was acutely aware of the dangers of reifying emptiness itself. He warned that to grasp emptiness as a kind of ultimate truth or metaphysical reality is to fall into the very trap his teachings are meant to avoid. Emptiness, in this sense, is empty too. It has no fixed essence. It is a conceptual tool, not a final destination. This radical reflexivity makes Nāgārjuna's thought both powerful and elusive. He denies the legitimacy of all views, including his own, not out of skepticism, but as a way to point beyond conceptualization altogether. Nāgārjuna's method of argumentation is also notable. He employs a style of reasoning known as prasanga, or reductio ad absurdum, in which he critiques the positions of his opponents by showing that they lead to contradictions or untenable consequences. He does not assert a new philosophical system, but dismantles existing ones. This method aligns with his overall goal, to free the mind from all fixed views. Through systematic deconstruction, he reveals that every philosophical position, when taken as ultimately true, collapses under its own weight. This does not mean that nothing is true, but that no truth can be grasped independently of context, perspective, and language. In Nāgārjuna's famous text, the Madhyamaka Karika, or Fundamental Verses on the Middle Way, he explores a wide range of topics using this dialectical method. He examines causation, motion, the self, time, and enlightenment, demonstrating in each case that our ordinary assumptions about these things are based on the illusion of intrinsic existence. By deconstructing these assumptions, he reveals the interdependent nature of all phenomena and underscores the necessity of emptiness as a philosophical and spiritual insight. One might wonder how such a philosophy avoids nihilism. If everything is empty, does anything matter? Nāgārjuna addresses this concern directly, arguing that emptiness does not negate the world but makes it intelligible. It is precisely because things are empty that they can change, function, and be understood. A world composed of intrinsically fixed entities would be static and unknowable. Emptiness, far from rendering life meaningless, opens the door to freedom, transformation, and wisdom. It allows for compassion because it shows that self and other are not absolutely separate. It makes ethical action meaningful because it reveals the interconnectedness of all beings. Nāgārjuna's influence on later Buddhist thought cannot be overstated. His ideas were further developed by thinkers such as Aryadeva, Bhaviveka, and Chandrakirti, and they became foundational in Tibetan traditions like the Gelug school of Tsongkhapa. In East Asia, his philosophy informed the Sanlun school in China and left its mark on Zen and other Mahayana traditions. Even outside of Buddhism, Nāgārjuna's insights have resonated with modern philosophers, particularly in the fields of phenomenology, deconstruction, and comparative metaphysics. Ultimately, Nāgārjuna's philosophy of emptiness is not a doctrine to be believed, but a lens through which to see. It invites us to question our most basic assumptions, to let go of conceptual fixations, and to open ourselves to the fluid, contingent, and relational nature of reality. In doing so, it offers not just a path of intellectual clarity, but a way toward liberation. It teaches us that freedom lies not in clinging to certainty, but embracing the openness of things as they are, empty, interdependent, and alive with possibility. In the vast and intricate landscape of Buddhist philosophy, few texts have had the enduring impact and philosophical weight of the Madhyamaka Karika, MMK, or Fundamental Verses on the Middle Way. Composed by the Indian philosopher Nāgārjuna in the 2nd or 3rd century CE, this text stands as a monumental work that systematizes the core insights of the Buddha through the rigorous lens of dialectical analysis. It is not only the foundational treatise of the Madhyamaka school of Mahayana Buddhism, but also one of the most philosophically sophisticated works in all of Indian philosophy. Nāgārjuna did not set out to construct a new metaphysical system. Instead, he sought to reveal the inconsistencies and limitations of all attempts to grasp reality through fixed concepts and assumptions about intrinsic nature, svabhava. The Madhyamaka Karika presents this endeavor through 27 concise chapters, each of which explores and deconstructs a fundamental aspect of existence or thought, such as causality, motion, perception, time, and selfhood. Through methodical reasoning and the relentless application of prasanga, reductio ad absurdum, Nāgārjuna shows that all conceptual frameworks ultimately collapse under scrutiny. Yet this is not a negative philosophy. What remains after the deconstruction is a radical openness, a viewless view that points toward liberation. At the heart of the MMK lies Nāgārjuna's identification of emptiness, shunyata, with dependent origination, pratitya samutpada. In chapter 24, verse 18, Nāgārjuna famously writes, "Whatever is dependently originated, that is explained to be emptiness. That, being a dependent designation, is itself the middle way." This equation, dependent origination equals emptiness equals the middle way, is the philosophical core of the text. It means that all things arise only in dependence upon other things. Nothing exists independently. Because of this, everything is empty of inherent existence. But Nāgārjuna does not stop there. He stresses that this view is itself a middle way, steering clear of both eternalism, the belief that things exist in and of themselves, and nihilism, the belief that nothing exists at all. The brilliance of the MMK lies not only in its content, but also in its method. Each chapter takes a philosophical or ontological category and carefully exposes its internal contradictions. Consider, for example, Chapter 2, Examination of Motion. Nāgārjuna asks, when does motion happen? If a thing is in motion, is it moving while it is already moving? That would be redundant. Is it moving while at rest? That would be contradictory. Is there such a thing as movement apart from a mover? The entire concept collapses. This style of argument is not meant to deny movement in any practical sense, it functions every day, but to show that movement as a metaphysical concept has no independent foundation. Similarly, in Chapter 7, Examination of Origination, Nāgārjuna challenges the very idea of causal production. Can a thing be produced from itself? If so, it already exists and need not be produced. Can it be produced from something else? Then it arises from what it is not, again incoherent. Can it arise from both itself and another, or from neither? All options are logically untenable. The conclusion is not that nothing arises, but that origination lacks swabhava, inherent nature. It is dependent, relational, and therefore empty. Chapter 24 is often considered the heart of the MMK. In it, Nāgārjuna addresses the common accusation that if all things are empty, then the Four Noble Truths, karma, and enlightenment become meaningless. He turns this criticism on its head. It is precisely because things are empty that the Four Noble Truths can function. If suffering and its causes were inherently fixed, they could not be eliminated. Liberation is possible because nothing is fixed. Thus, emptiness is not the enemy of the Dharma, it is its deepest expression. An essential feature of Nāgārjuna's thought in the MMK is the distinction between the two truths. Conventional truth, samvriti satya, the realm of everyday experience, language, and concepts. Ultimate truth, paramartha satya, the realization that all such conventional designations are empty of inherent reality. These two truths are not separate realities, but two aspects of understanding. The mistake lies in conflating the conventional with the ultimate, mistaking the map for the territory. Nāgārjuna affirms that both truths are necessary. Without the conventional, there is no path. Without the ultimate, there is no liberation. Importantly, the ultimate truth itself is not an object of knowledge. It is the collapsing of all conceptual frameworks, including the framework of emptiness itself. One of the MMK's most radical implications is that language itself is a dependent designation, prajnapti matra. Words point to things not with fixed referential precision, but in a fluid, context-dependent way. For Nāgārjuna, even terms like emptiness and nirvana are conceptual tools, not metaphysical destinations. As he states in Chapter 25, there is not the slightest distinction between samsara and nirvana. This is not a denial of liberation, but an affirmation that liberation is not found outside of the world. It is found in seeing the world, rightly, as empty. Given this subtlety, it is no surprise that the Mula Madhyamaka Karika inspired centuries of commentarial debate. In India, thinkers like Aryadeva, Paviveka, and Chandrakirti offered elaborations and defenses of Nāgārjuna's arguments. Paviveka attempted to blend Nāgārjuna's philosophy with Indian logic by introducing independent inferences, svatanta anumana, while Chandrakirti insisted on the traditional prasanga method,
only refuting, never asserting. This latter interpretation, known as Prasangika Madhyamaka, is widely considered the most faithful to Nāgārjuna's spirit. The MMK's influence spread far beyond India. In Tibet, it became a core curriculum in monastic education, particularly within the Gelug school founded by Tsongkhapa. There, it was studied not only for its philosophical content, but for its meditative implications. In China, it informed the Sanlun three-treatise school and contributed to the development of Chan, Zen Buddhism. Even in modern times, the MMK has been studied by philosophers like Nishitani Keiji in Japan and interpreted through the lens of Western philosophy by thinkers such as Heidegger, Derrida, and Garfield. What makes the Mula Madhyamaka so enduring is its radical honesty. It does not offer easy answers or a new ontology to replace the old. Instead, it reveals the limitations of all ontologies. It teaches that liberation does not come from having the right view, but from seeing through all views. This insight has both philosophical and existential consequences. It challenges our attachment to certainty, our craving for identity, our fear of impermanence. In its place, it offers a freedom that is not the absence of meaning, but the release from fixation. In conclusion, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika is more than a philosophical text. It is a path of liberation. It guides us not toward a new system of belief, but toward the relinquishing of belief in intrinsic existence. Through its piercing dialectic, its relentless refusal to let us rest in fixed views, it clears the ground for insight into the true nature of reality. And in doing so, it fulfills the very aim of the Buddhist teaching, not the construction of metaphysics, but the cessation of suffering through wisdom.
The emergence of the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy marks one of the most significant and transformative moments in the history of Buddhist thought. At the center of this development is Nāgārjuna, the 2nd century Indian philosopher whose insights into emptiness, shunyata, and dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, would reshape the Mahayana Buddhist tradition and influence generations of scholars, meditators, and philosophers. The school he founded, Madhyamaka, or Middle Way, offered not only a bold metaphysical critique, but a path to liberation rooted in radical openness and freedom from conceptual entrapment. Nāgārjuna did not invent the concept of emptiness. Rather, he clarified and expanded upon it. The early Buddhist canon already emphasized impermanence, non-self, and the conditioned nature of existence. These teachings implicitly suggested that all phenomena are devoid of any fixed essence. Nāgārjuna's genius lay in recognizing that these insights had radical philosophical implications. He articulated these implications systematically and rigorously, offering a thoroughgoing critique of both Buddhist and non-Buddhist philosophical assumptions. By doing so, he laid the foundations of Madhyamaka as a distinct school and a comprehensive philosophical method. At its heart, Madhyamaka philosophy is built around a simple yet powerful assertion. All phenomena are empty of inherent existence, svabhava. This means that nothing exists independently, from its own side, or in and of itself. Everything arises dependently, in a web of conditions and relationships. This insight is not merely an abstract principle, but the essence of the Buddhist teaching on dependent origination. As Nāgārjuna famously declared in his Mula Madhyamaka Karika, "Whatever is dependently arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That, being a dependent designation, is itself the middle way." This identification of emptiness with dependent origination allowed Nāgārjuna to claim continuity with the Buddha's original teachings while radically deepening their philosophical implications. In this sense, Madhyamaka is not a new doctrine, but a return to the core insight of Buddhism, freed from later scholastic elaborations that tended toward metaphysical reification. One of Nāgārjuna's principal concerns was the rising influence of the Abhidharma traditions, particularly the Sarvastivada school, which attempted to categorize and systematize all aspects of experience into defined dharmas, or fundamental constituents of reality.
While these efforts were sincere attempts to clarify the Buddha's teachings, Nāgārjuna saw in them a dangerous tendency to treat concepts and categories as ultimately real. In response, he launched a thorough deconstruction of these assumptions, showing that even the most refined conceptual frameworks are themselves empty and dependent. The method Nāgārjuna employed was dialectical. He used logical analysis to expose the contradictions and absurdities that arise when one assumes intrinsic existence. Rather than asserting a new ontology, he dismantled existing ones. This approach became a hallmark of the Madhyamaka school. It was not merely skeptical, but soteriological, designed to free the mind from all views that bind it to suffering. Following Nāgārjuna, Madhyamaka philosophy evolved and diversified. One of the earliest and most important of his successors was Aryadeva, who composed the Chaturšataka, 400 verses, and continued the dialectical critique of wrong views. Aryadeva emphasized the practical and ethical dimensions of Madhyamaka, highlighting its role in overcoming mental afflictions and progressing along the path to enlightenment. In the 6th century, Bhaviveka brought a new methodological rigor to Madhyamaka by incorporating formal logic and Indian epistemology, pramana. He introduced the use of autonomous syllogistic reasoning, swatantra anumana, to support Madhyamaka positions and engage with rival schools on their own terms. This innovation marked the emergence of what is now known as Swatantrika Madhyamaka. However, not everyone agreed with this approach. Chandrakirti, writing in the 7th century, rejected the use of independent syllogisms. He argued that Madhyamaka should rely solely on the prasanga method, refuting opponents by showing the untenable consequences of their assumptions without asserting anything independently. Chandrakirti's interpretation, known as prasangaka Madhyamaka, emphasized the non-assertive, deconstructive nature of Nāgārjuna's original method. According to Chandrakirti, even logical tools risk reifying concepts and should be used only to expose error, not to construct new truths. The debate between Swatantrika and Prasangika interpretations would become central to the development of Tibetan Madhyamaka. When Buddhism reached Tibet in the 8th century, Indian Madhyamaka philosophy was transmitted along with tantric traditions, giving rise to a unique synthesis of scholastic rigor and meditative practice. One of the most influential Tibetan thinkers was Tsongkhapa, founder of the Galug school. Tsongkhapa embraced Chandrakirti's Prasangika Madhyamaka and developed a detailed presentation of the two truths, conventional and ultimate, as mutually dependent aspects of reality. For Tsongkhapa, correct understanding of emptiness was essential for the practice of both ethics and meditation, and he offered extensive commentary on Nāgārjuna's and Chandrakirti's works. In Tibet, Madhyamaka became not only a philosophical system, but a framework for meditation. The understanding of emptiness was cultivated through analytical meditation, in which practitioners examined the nature of self and phenomena in order to uncover their lack of intrinsic nature. This was then integrated with calm abiding, shamatha, and compassion practices, forming a complete path to awakening. In this way, Madhyamaka served not only to clarify doctrine, but to transform consciousness. Beyond Tibet, Madhyamaka also played a major role in East Asia. In China, it was transmitted as part of the Sanlun, 3 treatises school, which focused on the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Shata Shastra, and Dwadashanikaya Shastra. These texts were introduced by the Indian monk Kumarajiva, whose translations profoundly influenced Chinese Buddhist philosophy. Sanlun thinkers like Sengzhao and Jizang applied Madhyamaka insights to Chinese metaphysical and ethical concerns, interpreting emptiness not as absence, but as dynamic interdependence and harmonious transformation. Though Sanlun eventually merged with other schools like Tiantai and Chan, its influence can still be felt in the apophatic language and paradoxical style of East Asian Buddhism. In modern times, Madhyamaka philosophy has attracted interest beyond traditional Buddhist contexts. Western philosophers and scholars have drawn parallels between Nāgārjuna's thought and various strands of postmodernism, phenomenology, and deconstruction. Figures like Jacques Derrida, Richard Rorty, and Graham Priest have noted the resonance between Nāgārjuna's radical critique of intrinsic identity and Western efforts to challenge metaphysical foundationalism. Scholars such as J. Garfield and David Loy have published extensively on the relevance of Madhyamaka to contemporary philosophical discourse, ethics, and environmental thinking. Yet it is important not to reduce Nāgārjuna's insights to abstract theory or cultural critique. At its core, Madhyamaka is a liberatory philosophy, a method for dissolving suffering by uprooting the delusions that bind us. It teaches that our experience of the world is shaped not only by conditions, but by our conceptual habits. By examining and ultimately transcending these habits, one opens to a deeper, more compassionate way of being. What makes Nāgārjuna's Madhyamaka so powerful is its balance of rigor and humility. It offers a deep critique of conceptuality without falling into cynicism. It affirms the possibility of wisdom and freedom while refusing to define them in fixed terms. It challenges us to let go, not only of false views, but of the very tendency to hold views as ultimate. In this letting go, a space opens for insight, for transformation, and for compassion to arise. In summary, the development of Madhyamaka Buddhism, rooted in Nāgārjuna's vision, represents one of the highest achievements of Buddhist philosophy. It is a living tradition that continues to evolve, inspire, and guide. Whether in the analytical rigors of Tibetan scholasticism, the meditative silence of Chan, or the deconstructive gestures of contemporary philosophy, the spirit of Madhyamaka endures as a reminder that the truest wisdom often lies beyond words, in the open clarity of emptiness.
Among all ancient philosophers who challenged the nature of reality, Nāgārjuna stands out for his masterful ability to undermine fixed views through a dialectical method that remains relevant even in today's philosophical landscape. His approach, often termed the prasanga method, does not merely seek to replace false views with true ones. It aims to destroy the very habit of holding to any views as ultimately real. Through a combination of rigorous logic and radical humility, Nāgārjuna's dialectics offer a revolutionary approach to metaphysics, epistemology, and spiritual practice. Rather than building a system of knowledge, he systematically deconstructs every conceptual framework that claims to explain reality in fixed or absolute terms. At the center of Nāgārjuna's method lies the use of reductio ad absurdum arguments, prasanga, in which he takes an opponent's thesis and reveals its untenable consequences. This style of reasoning is not merely destructive, it serves a higher purpose. For Nāgārjuna, the problem is not just incorrect doctrines, but the very tendency to treat any view as having ultimate validity. He sees this tendency as the root of suffering and confusion. Liberation, therefore, lies not in adopting the right metaphysics, but in freeing the mind from all reifications, all projections of intrinsic nature, svabhava. Nāgārjuna's approach is perhaps best illustrated through his application of the Catuskoti, the fourfold negation. This classical Indian logical framework consists of four possibilities regarding any proposition. It exists. It does not exist. It both exists and does not exist. It neither exists nor does not exist. Rather than affirming one of these options, Nāgārjuna shows that all four, when examined closely, fail to hold up to scrutiny. This radical refusal to assert or deny any metaphysical position is not a sign of confusion, but a method of exposing the limitations of conceptual thought. In the face of such total deconstruction, what remains is not nihilism, but shunyata, emptiness, the insight that all things are dependent, relational, and devoid of inherent essence. Consider, for example, Nāgārjuna's analysis of causality. In the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, he asks whether something can arise from itself, which is redundant, from another, which suggests creation from nothing, from both, which is incoherent, or from neither, which denies origination. All four possibilities collapse. The result is not that causation is denied, but that it is reframed. Causation is not a relationship between fixed entities, but a process without inherent foundation. It functions conventionally, but has no independent existence. This insight strips away our assumptions about how the world really works and leaves us with a more fluid, relational understanding of experience. Another striking example is Nāgārjuna's treatment of the self.
Buddhist philosophy had long rejected the existence of a permanent self, emphasizing instead the anatta doctrine. Nāgārjuna pushes this further by deconstructing even the subtle tendencies to reify a self behind the aggregates, skandhas. If the self is the same as the aggregates, then it is reducible to impermanent parts. If it is different, then it must be something separate and unobservable. In either case, the concept fails. The self, like all things, is a dependent designation, a useful fiction, but not a metaphysical reality. It is this insistence on the emptiness of even Buddhist categories, nirvana, karma, the Four Noble Truths, that distinguishes Nāgārjuna's dialectics from mere polemic. He does not stop at criticizing non-Buddhist views. He turns his gaze inward, showing that even the most sacred ideas can become obstacles when treated as ultimately real. In fact, his most famous and oft-quoted line may be, "Those who see dependent origination see the Dharma. Those who see the Dharma see the Buddha." By exposing the conceptual scaffolding that holds our worldview in place, Nāgārjuna invites us into a new relationship with thought itself. Instead of relying on fixed categories, we begin to see the world as a dynamic interplay of conditions. Language, concepts, identities, all are provisional, dependent on context and function. They serve a purpose, but they are not the truth. This has profound implications not only for philosophy, but for practice. In traditional Buddhist soteriology, clinging to views is a primary cause of suffering. People cling not only to possessions and relationships, but to ideas about self, morality, permanence, and control. Nāgārjuna's dialectics function as a kind of philosophical meditation, gradually dismantling these conceptual attachments. By seeing through the illusions of swabhava, the practitioner cultivates prajna, wisdom that perceives the emptiness of all phenomena. A key point to emphasize is that emptiness itself is also empty. This is perhaps Nāgārjuna's most subtle and radical claim. Emptiness is not a new metaphysical ground that replaces being or essence. It is not true reality hiding behind appearances. Rather, it is the absence of intrinsic existence in all things, including the concept of emptiness. As he warns in MMK 13.8, emptiness wrongly grasped is like picking up a poisonous snake by the wrong end. Thus, the dialectical method must be applied even to the insights it produces. There is no refuge in emptiness as an ultimate view. The point is not to arrive at a correct conclusion, but to arrive at a mind free from conclusions. This freedom is not indifference or apathy. It is clarity, openness, and compassion. It is the basis for wise engagement with the world. Candrakirti, one of Nāgārjuna's great interpreters, expanded on this dialectical approach in his Madhyamaka Vatara, emphasizing that the purpose of dialectics is not to destroy conventional reality, but to reveal its provisional and constructed nature. For Candrakirti, and later for Tibetan thinkers like Tsongkhapa, the function of dialectics was to support the practitioner in navigating the two truths, conventional and ultimate, without mistaking one for the other. The dialectical method also anticipates modern deconstructive and post-structuralist thought. Like Derrida's différance, Nāgārjuna's emptiness is not a presence or absence, but a play of relationships. Like Wittgenstein's later philosophy, Nāgārjuna sees meaning as emerging from use, not intrinsic reference. And like Heidegger, he challenges the metaphysical assumptions that underlie Western ontology. Yet it would be a mistake to assimilate Nāgārjuna too quickly into Western categories. His project is deeply embedded in a Buddhist soteriological context. His goal is not intellectual coherence for its own sake, but liberation. His dialectics are a kind of upaya, or skillful means, aimed at undoing the structures of ignorance and attachment that sustain suffering. Moreover, Nāgārjuna's dialectics challenge not only metaphysics but also epistemology. If all concepts are empty, then knowledge itself must be provisional. This does not lead to relativism or skepticism, but to a deeper kind of wisdom, one that embraces uncertainty and resists the urge to freeze reality into fixed truths. It opens the door to compassion because it dissolves the rigid boundaries between self and other, subject and object. In the end, Nāgārjuna's dialectical method is not a path to despair, but to freedom. By patiently deconstructing the views that bind us, we begin to see things as they truly are, fluid, interdependent, and open. This vision does not negate the world, it allows us to engage with it more skillfully, more humbly, and more lovingly. His dialectics are not the destruction of reality, but the destruction of illusion, and in that destruction, a deeper, freer kind of reality becomes visible.
Nāgārjuna, the towering figure of Madhyamaka philosophy, stands not only as a pivotal thinker in Buddhist history, but also as a foundational voice whose influence resonates far beyond the confines of Buddhist tradition. His radical insights into emptiness, shunyata, dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, and the dialectical dismantling of all views have shaped centuries of Buddhist practice, philosophy, and pedagogy. Moreover, his thought has extended its reach into modern philosophical debates, interreligious dialogue, and even contemporary discussions on language, ontology, and the nature of reality itself. Within the Buddhist world, Nāgārjuna's influence is immeasurable. He did not simply propose a new theory, he provided a new framework for understanding the very purpose of Buddhist teaching. Through his Mula Madhyamaka Karika, MMK, Nāgārjuna clarified that emptiness is not a side doctrine or a speculative idea, but the heart of the Buddha's wisdom. For him, to understand emptiness is to understand dependent origination. And to understand dependent origination is to understand the Dharma itself. This framing reoriented Mahayana Buddhism around a more radical expression of non-attachment and non-conceptual insight. The concept of swabhava, inherent existence, was revealed not just as a mistaken philosophical view, but as the very foundation of ignorance, avidya. Liberation was not a matter of replacing false views with correct ones, but of seeing through the entire process of conceptual construction altogether. Nāgārjuna's insistence on the emptiness of all things, even the emptiness of emptiness, offered a direct path to experiential freedom. In Indian Buddhist philosophy, in the centuries following Nāgārjuna, his thought was developed by influential Indian scholars such as Aryadeva, Bhaviveka, Buddhapalita, and Chandrakirti. Each made unique contributions while preserving the core spirit of Madhyamaka. Aryadeva emphasized practical applications of Madhyamaka for spiritual progress. Bhaviveka attempted to integrate Nāgārjuna's insights with Indian formal logic, pramana, by introducing swatantra anumana, autonomous syllogisms. Buddhapalita maintained the purely deconstructive method, prasanga, refusing to assert any thesis of his own. Chandrakirti staunchly defended this approach and laid the groundwork for what would become known as prasangika madhyamaka, a dominant philosophical stance in Tibetan Buddhism. Nāgārjuna's philosophy thus catalyzed internal debates among Indian Buddhists about the relationship between logic, language, and the ultimate nature of truth. His legacy was not uniform dogma, but dynamic dialogue. In Tibetan Buddhism, nowhere did Nāgārjuna's influence take deeper root than in Tibet, where Madhyamaka became the gold standard of Buddhist philosophical analysis. Tibetan masters such as Tsongkhapa, Longchenpa, Gorampa, and Ju Mipam all engaged rigorously with Nāgārjuna's teachings, each interpreting them in ways that integrated dialectical rigor with meditative insight. Tsongkhapa, founder of the Gelug school, devoted much of his life to defending and elaborating Prasangika Madhyamaka. His magnum opus, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lamrim Chenmo, places Nāgārjuna at the center of the Mahayana path. In Nyingma and Kagyu schools, Madhyamaka was often harmonized with Dzogchen and Mahamudra teachings, emphasizing the inseparability of emptiness and awareness. Sakya thinkers like Gorampa explored Madhyamaka alongside tantric views, showing that Nāgārjuna's insights could inform the most esoteric levels of practice. Tibetan scholasticism made the Mula Madhyamaka Karika and its commentaries required reading for monastic education, and Nāgārjuna came to be revered not only as a philosopher, but as a bodhisattva, whose teachings were a direct extension of the Buddha's own wisdom. In East Asian Buddhism,
Nāgārjuna's impact was also profound in East Asia, especially through the Sunlan, three-treatise school in China, which centered its study around three key Madhyamaka texts: Nāgārjuna's MMK, the Shata Shastra, attributed to Aryadeva, and the Dwadashanika Shastra. Chinese philosophers like Seng Zhao and Jitsong brought Nāgārjuna's thought into dialogue with Taoist and Confucian sensibilities, emphasizing the non-duality of form and emptiness. Though the Sunlan school eventually merged with other traditions like Tiantai and Huayan, its dialectical influence remained embedded in East Asian thought. Zen, Chan Buddhism, while often wary of conceptual analysis, nevertheless carried forward Nāgārjuna's spirit of dismantling views and experiencing direct non-conceptual realization. Nāgārjuna's idea that words cannot capture ultimate truth, but must be used skillfully to point beyond themselves, resonated deeply with Zen koan practice and the emphasis on sudden awakening. Beyond traditional Buddhism. In modern times, Nāgārjuna's philosophy has found resonance in fields far outside traditional Buddhist boundaries. In Western academics, comparative philosophy has revealed striking parallels between Nāgārjuna's ideas and various strands of continental philosophy, phenomenology, and post-structuralism. Martin Heidegger's critique of metaphysical presence, Jacques Derrida's deconstruction of binary oppositions, and Ludwig Wittgenstein's later views on the limits of language all echo Nāgārjuna's core insight that meaning, identity, and reality are not fixed but arise contextually and relationally. Philosophers like J. Garfield, David Kalupana, and Graham Priest have argued that Nāgārjuna anticipates certain moves in Western thought by centuries. Graham Priest, in particular, has interpreted Nāgārjuna through the lens of dialetheism, the idea that some contradictions are true, a perspective that aligns intriguingly with Nāgārjuna's use of the Katushkoti logic, which allows for rejecting all four positions in a proposition. Nāgārjuna's influence has also reached fields like cognitive science, ecology, and psychology. His emphasis on interdependence and non-duality aligns well with systems theory, Buddhist-informed mindfulness practices, and emerging models of the embodied mind. In ecological philosophy, his rejection of the isolated self offers a powerful argument for rethinking human identity as embedded in interdependent networks, social, ecological, and planetary. In interfaith and ethical dialogue, Nāgārjuna's philosophy is increasingly brought into conversation with other religious traditions. Christian, Hindu, Jewish, and Islamic philosophers have engaged with his ideas to explore common ground and profound differences. His method, never dogmatic, always inquisitive, has proven valuable for interfaith dialogue that seeks depth without erasure. Ethically, Nāgārjuna's vision of relationality offers an alternative to both moral absolutism and relativism. In a world where all beings are seen as mutually dependent and devoid of fixed identities, compassion becomes the only sane response. Emptiness is not a denial of value, it is the foundation for care, humility, and responsibility. Nāgārjuna's influence is not a static legacy, it is a living force that continues to evolve, provoke, and inspire. His thought invites not belief, but investigation. He offers no final answers, only the tools to dissolve the craving for certainty. And in that dissolution, there is freedom, not the freedom of having the truth, but the freedom of no longer needing one. In a world increasingly fragmented by ideology, division, and conceptual rigidity, Nāgārjuna's middle way may be more relevant than ever. He reminds us that wisdom lies not in clinging to what is real or unreal, but in walking a path between extremes, grounded in compassion, clarity, and emptiness.